There is a moment that almost every person in America experiences, usually in silence, usually late at night when everything is quiet and there are no distractions left to run to. It's that moment when you stop scrolling, stop laughing, stop pretending, and you're left alone with your thoughts. And in that silence, a question starts to rise. Is this really the life I'm meant to live? Not the life you show people on the outside, but the life you feel on the inside. Because on paper, everything might look fine. You might be working, surviving, providing, pushing through another week, doing what you're supposed to do. But deep down, something feels unfinished. Something feels delayed. Something feels like it's still waiting to happen in your life. And here's the truth most people never say out loud. It's not that you don't want more. It's that a part of you already knows there is more. A better version of your life. A stronger version of you. A future where stress is not yours. Your identity, struggle is not your routine, and limitation is not your story. But then reality steps in. Bills, pressure, responsibility, fear, doubt, time. And slowly that vision inside you gets pushed into the background, replaced with survival mode, routine days, and the habit of just getting by. And the most dangerous part is not failure. It is forgetting what you once believed was possible for yourself. But what if I told you that feeling you have right now, that quiet dissatisfaction, that inner pull towards something greater is not a coincidence. It is not weakness. It is direction. And if you stay with this message until the end, you will understand something most people never realize in their entire life, that the life you desire is not something you are waiting for. It is something you are being shaped to build. Clarity of desire is the starting point of every meaningful transformation, because the mind cannot move toward a destination it does not clearly understand. Most people carry scattered thoughts of success, freedom, wealth, or happiness, but these thoughts remain weak because they are not defined with precision. A vague desire produces a vague effort, and a vague effort produces a vague life. When a person says, "I want to be successful," but cannot define what success looks like in measurable, emotional, and practical terms, the mind has nothing concrete to build toward. The subconscious works like a guidance system. It does not respond strongly to confusion, but it responds with intensity to clear and repeated instruction. This is why people who achieve extraordinary outcomes are often not the most talented, but the most certain about what they want. They have removed ambiguity from their vision. They can see it, describe it, feel it, and mentally step into it as if it already exists. Clarity transforms desire from an emotional wish into a mental blueprint. When the image of the desired life becomes specific, the brain begins to organize behavior around it. Decisions become easier because they are filtered through a defined outcome. For example, a person who clearly desires financial independence with a specific income target and lifestyle vision will naturally begin to evaluate opportunities differently. They will notice distractions faster, reject low-value habits more quickly, and recognize paths that align with their vision. Without clarity, the same person would drift between choices, influenced by short-term emotion instead of long-term direction. Clarity also reduces internal conflict. Many people suffer not because they lack opportunity, but because they are mentally divided between multiple unclear desires. One part of them wants comfort, another wants growth, another wants approval, and another wants freedom. This internal fragmentation creates hesitation, and hesitation destroys momentum. When desire becomes clear, it also begins to generate emotional intensity. The mind does not act strongly on what it barely understands, but it responds powerfully to what it vividly imagines. A clearly defined desire creates mental imagery, and that imagery begins to influence feelings, expectations, and eventually behavior. This is why clarity is not just intellectual, it is emotional alignment. It creates a sense of direction that feels real enough to pursue. People often underestimate how much confusion drains motivation. When you are unclear, every action feels uncertain, and uncertainty weakens commitment. But when you are clear, even difficult actions feel meaningful because they are connected to a defined outcome. Over time, clarity acts like a filter, removing noise from life and allowing focus to concentrate only on what moves you closer to the desired vision. Thoughts becoming direction is the process through which repeated mental focus gradually shapes the course of a person's decisions, behaviors, and ultimately their entire life path. The human mind does not remain neutral in the long term. It tends to move in the direction of the most dominant thoughts it entertains. Every thought carries a subtle influence, But when a thought is repeated consistently, it begins to form patterns. These patterns become expectations, and expectations quietly guide choices without conscious awareness. This is why two people with similar starting points can end up in completely different realities. It is not only what they had or lacked externally, but what they repeatedly entertained internally. A person who constantly thinks about limitation, failure, or lack begins to interpret situations through that lens, even when opportunities are present. Meanwhile, a person who repeatedly focuses on growth, possibility, and solutions begins to notice pathways that others overlook. Thoughts also influence emotional states, and emotions are what ultimately drive action. A thought alone may seem harmless, but when it triggers a feeling, it gains power. For our example, consistent thoughts of doubt create hesitation, and hesitation leads to delay. Repeated thoughts of confidence create momentum, and momentum leads to execution. Over time, this cycle becomes self-reinforcing. The mind begins to align identity with the most frequent thought patterns. If someone repeatedly thinks of themselves as someone who struggles, they begin to unconsciously make decisions that confirm that identity. If someone repeatedly thinks of themselves as capable, resourceful, or improving, they begin to act in ways that strengthen that belief. In this way, thought is not passive reflection, it is the early formation of identity in motion. Direction is not created by one powerful thought, but by thousands of small, repeated mental patterns. A single inspiring idea may spark motivation, but it is the repetition of that idea that turns it into behavior. This is why focus is more powerful than intensity. Many people experience strong bursts of motivation, but because their thoughts are not consistent, their direction remains unstable. They think one thing in the morning and another in the evening, which creates internal conflict and weakens progress. On the other hand, individuals who maintain consistent mental focus, even if their progress is slow, begin to move in a predictable direction. The mind starts filtering reality based on dominant thought patterns, noticing opportunities aligned with them and ignoring those that are not. Over time, repeated thinking shapes perception, and perception shapes action. What a person believes to be possible becomes the boundary of their behavior. If thoughts are scattered, direction becomes scattered. If thoughts are disciplined and focused, direction becomes intentional and strong. This is why controlling thought is not about suppression, but about training the mind to repeatedly return to the vision of what is desired until that vision becomes the natural reference point for every decision, reaction, and expectation in daily life. Discipline converting dreams into reality is the point where imagination stops being a mental experience and starts becoming a physical transformation of life. Every person is capable of dreaming, visualizing, and feeling inspired for a moment, but very few are willing to translate that emotional energy into structured daily action. Desire is natural, almost effortless, because it exists in the mind without requiring sacrifice. Discipline, however, is the opposite. It requires repetition, control, and commitment, even when motivation is absent. This is where most people separate from their goals, not because their vision is too big, but because their routine is too inconsistent. A dream without discipline remains a mental escape, something the mind visits to feel temporarily empowered, while real life continues unchanged. Discipline is what forces alignment between what a person says they want and what they actually do when no one is watching. The power of discipline lies in its ability to create structure out of chaos. Without it, life becomes reactive, shaped by moods, distractions, and external circumstances. With it, life becomes intentional, shaped by decisions that are repeated regardless of emotional state. A disciplined individual does not wait for perfect conditions, they create progress within imperfect conditions. This repetition builds momentum, and momentum is what transforms small actions into visible results over time. The mind often underestimates the importance of daily actions because they appear insignificant in isolation. But discipline understands that accumulation is where transformation lives. One day of effort seems small, but hundreds of days of aligned effort create a completely different reality. Discipline also rewires identity through action. A person does not become successful by thinking about success repeatedly. They become successful by behaving in ways that are consistent with success repeatedly. Every disciplined action sends a signal to the mind that says, "This is who I am becoming." Over time, identity begins to shift not through inspiration but through evidence. When someone wakes up early consistently, works on their goals consistently, and resists distraction consistently, their self-image begins to change without them needing to force belief. The body and behavior lead, and the mind eventually follows. This is why discipline is more reliable than motivation, because motivation fluctuates based on emotion, but discipline is anchored in decision. There is also a silent power in discipline that most people overlook, and it is the compounding effect of consistency. Small disciplined actions repeated over time begin to stack results in ways that appear sudden from the outside, but are actually the product of invisible effort. What seems like a breakthrough moment is usually the result of long preparation. Yet discipline demands patience during the phase when nothing seems to be happening, when effort feels disconnected from reward, when results are still forming beneath the surface of visible reality, and continuing anyway becomes the defining factor between those who eventually reshape their circumstances and those who remain trapped in cycles of repeated intention without execution, constantly restarting but never building sustained progress that leads toward measurable change in direction and outcome. Your environment influencing your future is one of the most underestimated forces shaping human destiny, because it quietly determines what feels normal, what feels possible, and what feels out of reach. A person does not make decisions in isolation. Every decision is influenced by the surrounding inputs that constantly shape perception. The people you spend time with, the conversations you hear daily, the content you consume, and the physical spaces you occupy all act like invisible programming that guides your thinking. Over time, the mind adapts to its environment by default, not by choice. If the environment is filled with doubt, negativity, or limitation, those patterns begin to feel familiar, and what is familiar often feels safe, even if it is harmful to growth. On the other hand, when the environment reflects ambition, discipline, and possibility, the mind gradually expands its expectations of what life can be. Human behavior is highly imitative, especially in subtle ways. People unconsciously mirror the habits, language, and attitudes of those they are exposed to regularly. This means that even without direct instruction, influence is constantly happening. If a person is surrounded by individuals who accept mediocrity as normal, their own standards slowly adjust downward without them realizing it. Small compromises become acceptable because they are normalized in the environment. Likewise, when someone is surrounded by individuals who value growth, focus, and responsibility, those traits begin to feel natural and expected. The environment does not need to force change. It creates pressure through repetition and exposure until certain behaviors become automatic. The digital environment is equally powerful as the physical one. What a person watches, listens to, and scrolls through daily shapes internal dialogue. Constant exposure to distraction trains the mind to seek short-term stimulation rather than long-term progress. In contrast, exposure to focused, educational, or purpose-driven content trains attention to stay aligned with goals. Over time, this repeated input creates a shift in mental baseline. What once felt difficult becomes easier simply because the environment has repeatedly reinforced it. The mind is always adapting to what it consumes most frequently, whether that consumption is intentional or unconscious. Changing one's life often requires changing one's environment first, because willpower alone struggles to compete with constant external influence. A person may have strong intentions, but if their surroundings consistently pull them in a different direction, inconsistency becomes inevitable. This is why environment is not just a background factor, but an active force in shaping outcomes. When environment and desire are aligned, progress feels natural. When they are in conflict, progress feels like resistance. Over time, the environment either reinforces growth or reinforces limitation, and most people do not notice the shift until their habits, mindset, and results have already been shaped in a direction that feels difficult to reverse without intentional restructuring of daily influences and associations that define their mental and emotional landscape. Temporary pain creating permanent gain is the principle that explains why meaningful progress in life always carries a cost, and why avoidance of discomfort ultimately preserves limitation rather than peace. Human instinct is naturally wired to seek comfort and avoid pain. Yet every level of growth requires stepping directly into the very experiences the mind tries to escape. Whether it is financial discipline, physical training, emotional resilience, or skill development, the early stages always involve resistance. The mind interprets this resistance as a signal to stop, but in reality, it is a signal that adaptation is taking place. Pain in this context is not punishment, it is feedback that transformation is occurring. The discomfort of learning something new, the fatigue of consistent effort, and the frustration of slow progress are all temporary states that exist only during the construction phase of a better outcome. What makes this principle powerful is the contrast between short-term experience and long-term result. In the moment, discomfort feels significant, almost convincing enough to abandon the process. But in hindsight, those same moments of difficulty become the foundation of strength, confidence, and capability. Every skill that now feels natural was once awkward. Every level of success that appears stable was once unstable. The temporary pain was the bridge between inability and mastery. However, most people misinterpret this stage because they expect immediate reward for effort. When reward does not appear quickly, they assume the effort is wasted, not realizing that most valuable outcomes have a delayed structure. The delay is not absence of progress, it is the time required for internal and external systems to align with new demands. Avoidance of pain creates a different type of consequence, one that is not immediately felt but gradually accumulates over time. Every time discomfort is avoided, the mind strengthens its preference for ease over growth. This creates a pattern where short-term relief leads to long-term limitation. A person may feel comfortable today by avoiding discipline, avoiding effort, or avoiding risk, but that comfort compounds into stagnation. Meanwhile, those who accept temporary discomfort begin to build resilience, skill, and confidence that compound in the opposite direction. Over time, the gap between these two paths becomes significant, not because one moment was decisive, but because repeated choices accumulated into entirely different life trajectories. The transformation process always demands endurance through phases where results are not yet visible. This is where most people disengage, not because they lack ability, but because they misjudge the role of discomfort. They see pain as a warning instead of a requirement. Yet every meaningful achievement carries a period where effort feels heavier than reward, where progress feels slow, and where belief is tested repeatedly. Those who persist through this stage begin to experience a shift. Where the same actions that once felt difficult become familiar, and eventually they become identity. What was once temporary pain becomes permanent strength embedded into character, capability, and opportunity, shaping a life that reflects accumulated endurance rather than momentary avoidance of discomfort. Persistence outlasting talent is the principle that explains why long-term success is rarely determined by initial ability, intelligence, or natural advantage, but instead by the capacity to continue when progress is slow, uncertain, or emotionally exhausting. Talent can create an early advantage, making certain tasks appear easier for some individuals in the beginning, but it does not guarantee endurance when challenges become repetitive or when results are delayed. Persistence, on the other hand, is the force that keeps a person engaged with their goal even when excitement fades and when external validation is absent. It is the quiet decision to continue showing up, continuing to learn, and continuing to act even when there is no immediate reward. Over time, this consistency creates separation between those who rely on initial strength and those who rely on sustained effort. The human mind often overvalues speed and underestimates duration. Many people assume that success is a result of sudden breakthroughs, but in reality, most breakthroughs are the result of prolonged effort that eventually reaches a tipping point. Persistence is what carries a person through the invisible phase of growth, where effort does not yet match visible results. During this phase, talent alone is not enough because talent without continuation stops too early to compound into meaningful outcomes. Persistence fills this gap by maintaining action long enough for skills, opportunities, and understanding to develop fully. It allows repetition to refine ability, and refinement is what transforms basic effort into mastery over time. Another important aspect of persistence is its relationship with failure. Talent can be discouraged by failure because it often creates expectations of early success, but persistence reinterprets failure as part of the process rather than the end of it. Each setback becomes data, each mistake becomes feedback, and each delay becomes training for resilience. This mindset shift allows a person to remain engaged even when outcomes are not favorable in the short term. As persistence continues, confidence is no longer based on outcomes but on survival through difficulty. The individual begins to trust their ability to continue rather than their ability to succeed quickly. Persistence also compounds in a way that is not immediately visible. Small, consistent actions accumulate into patterns, and these patterns eventually become results that appear sudden from the outside. What people often call overnight success is usually the outcome of long periods of unseen repetition. The power of Persia hence lies in its ability to turn ordinary effort into extraordinary outcomes simply through duration. While talent may create momentum at the beginning, it is persistence that sustains momentum when conditions become difficult, when motivation fluctuates, and when external support is absent, and the difference becomes visible over time as consistency compounds into results that, in the end, living the life you desire is not a matter of chance, timing, or external permission. It is the result of a quiet decision made again and again, in moments when no one is watching and when nothing feels easy. It begins with clarity, grows through disciplined thought, strengthens through consistent action, and is shaped by the environment you choose, the sacrifices you accept, and the persistence you refuse to surrender. The life you are dreaming about is not separate from you. It is being built by you every single day through the standards you accept and the habits you repeat. Nothing changes overnight. Right, but everything changes over time when direction is clear and commitment does not break under pressure. There will always be reasons to delay, to doubt, and to settle. But there will also always be a deeper voice inside you that refuses to accept limitation as final. That voice is not asking for perfection, it is asking for movement. Even slow progress is still progress when it is consistent. Even small actions become powerful when they are repeated long enough. And even ordinary people can build extraordinary lives when they decide that comfort is no longer the highest priority. So carry this truth with you. Your future is not waiting for the perfect moment. It is waiting for your decision to begin and continue. The moment you choose discipline over distraction, clarity over confusion, and persistence over quitting, you step into a different direction of life. And in that direction, everything slowly begins to change. Thank you for listening, and good luck on your journey as why. Or build the life you truly desire. Stay committed, stay focused, and never underestimate what you are capable of becoming. If this message resonated with you, make sure to follow my channel Mind Wealth Theory for more powerful motivational content that will help you reshape your mindset, strengthen your discipline, and unlock your full potential.